What's up guys, it's Canadian and today I am presenting to you my how to play Orisa guide. Unlike my Zarya guides, I'm going to try and cover everything there is to cover about Orisa in one video. There will be timestamps in the description for each section, so if you want to jump to a specific section, go ahead and check there. So let's get right into it. So these are the topics we're going to be covering today. I'll be talking about how and when to use Orisa's fusion driver, her Halt ability, Fortify, protective barrier, Supercharger, how to position with Orisa, who you should be shooting at as Orisa, and tying everything together in Orisa's gameplay loop. So let's begin. Topic 1 is Orisa's primary fire, aka fusion driver. For those that like numbers, I'll briefly put the numbers of Orisa's fusion driver on the screen. Orisa has a very interesting weapon. Her gun has 150 ammo, has no bloom, aka the spread is constant, and it is projectile, which means it has no damage fall off. She is also one of the few tanks that can consistently headshot enemies, and her movement speed is greatly reduced while shooting. So how do you use Orisa's fusion driver? Since the weapon is projectile, you're gonna want to lead your targets. If they're far away, you're going to want to lead them more, and if they're closer, you don't have to lead them as much. Since the spread of the weapon is constant, you never have to worry about like tap firing or anything like that. You can just full auto all the time, and you'll never have to worry that you'll be missing any shots because you are full auto. The main tip I can give for newer Orisa players is learn to reload less. Orisa has the longest reload in the game at 2.5 seconds and the second largest magazine in the game behind Bastion. Common mistake I see Orisa players make is reloading with 50 or more ammo left in the middle of a fight. That's a really bad habit because it's stopping your DPS for a whole 2.5 seconds. You really want to use as much of your magazine as you can and learn to reload less. By reloading less, you will do more damage and generate more ult charge. One last tip for Orisa's fusion driver is when you are running away or retreating from a fight, make sure you stop shooting. If you're walking backwards and shooting, your movement speed is very slow. If your goal is to get away, just completely 180 so the enemy can't see your head as much and stop shooting, so you'll be moving as fast as possible while giving the enemy no angle on your head. Now let's talk about Fortify. Here are the numbers surrounding Fortify. And here's a list of ability interactions with Fortify. Fortify is very important in keeping Orisa alive. Gives you 50% damage reduction and negates all crowd control abilities. You want to use Fortify reactively instead of proactively. Make sure it actually blocks incoming damage, because if you waste Fortify, the enemy team will capitalize. Fortify's cooldown does not start until the ability ends, making Fortify essentially a 14-second cooldown. The 4-second duration plus the 10-second cooldown. This is another reason why it is super important to get great value out of your Fortify, since it is such a long cooldown. You can use Fortify to play aggressive as Orisa, but once it's on cooldown, you need to return to playing defensively because you don't have the protection of Fortify. Fortify is great for body blocking doorways or body blocking for your allies. Fortify does not block line of sight abilities like Diva Bomb or Earth Shatter. Allies behind you will be hit by the full effects of line of sight abilities. An aggressive use of Fortify to take space is to Fortify first and then run in. You're able to soak up a lot of damage and put yourself in a position to get a very aggressive barrier off, creating a lot of space for your team to work with.
I'm trying to pocket him forward.
Tree dead? Yo, push around. Let's move on to Protective Barrier. Here are the numbers involved with Orisa's Barrier. Barrier is Orisa's second most important ability, so it's crucial to get value out of your barriers. One way to do this is to place your barrier near corners or doorways. This provides your team with extra cover if your barrier is destroyed. They can retreat around the corner or through the door. Placing your barrier in the open will surely get you killed. Orisa's barrier cooldown starts when it is fired, not when it is deployed. Another tip is to shoot your barrier straight up if you have the opportunity. The travel time of the barrier is 6 seconds, so your barrier will only have 2 seconds left on its cooldown when the initial barrier you fired vertically lands. This is called shield stacking. Another tip is to angle the barrier between two sightlines to provide maximum coverage for your team. In this example, the barrier is only facing one direction and my flank is open. But if you angle the barrier between the two sightlines, you will have much more protection. The way you do this is by aiming the barrier projector at the intersection of the two sightlines. Please see my super fancy drawing to get a picture of what I mean. Another way to angle the shield between two sightlines is to let the curvature of the barrier cover one of the sightlines. As I point the projected barrier at one angle, the curve of the barrier protects from the other angle. It's also key to call out when your barrier is on cooldown and you cannot block enemy abilities such as self-destruct. When I'm playing as Orisa and I don't have barrier and my team is expecting me to block something, I constantly say in comms, no barrier, no barrier, no barrier, so my team knows they need to get to cover ASAP.
Cover flanking Sophie. No heal.
No shield, no shield, no shield, no shield.
Nice. Phew.
Another tip is to call out your shield cooldown whenever you can so your team knows when they can expect a new barrier. Also call out where you're placing the barrier so they know where to go, where it is, and where it's providing cover. Also call out when your shield is about to break. No shield, 2 seconds.
D.Va coming right side way.
As Orisa, you want to dance around your barrier to stop enemies from shooting you. If they're trying to walk through your barrier, you can rotate through your barrier so then they're still on the other side. A common strategy with Orisa's protective barrier is to turtle against a wall. What this means is, as Orisa, you put yourself in a corner or against a wall and shoot the barrier at your feet. Because of the angle of the barrier, the enemy team will not have any way to attack you unless they run through your barrier. You can take this one step further with the technique called the Slurpee Shield, invented by a player named Slurpee Thief. This is where when you're turtling, you place yourself in the corner with your shield so precisely that Orisa's hitbox of her character model takes up all the available space, so enemy heroes literally cannot walk through the shield, making Orisa essentially invincible. Combine this strategy with Halt and Fortify and you become a unkillable damage-dealing turtle monster. As Orisa, you need to be careful of standing too close to your shield. If you stand too close to it, your hitbox will stick out and enemies will be able to shoot you while you're standing behind the shield. Another strategy with Orisa's barriers is called CSGO shields, inspired by Counter-Strike Global Offensive grenade usage and Evil Toaster's stream. What this means is, as Orisa, you go into custom games and practice shooting your shields up in the air at various angles from various locations and various maps, and they will land exactly where you need them to. Because of the shield's travel time, your next shield will be available right away, increasing your overall shield health for your push. I guess you could call this CSGO shield stacking. Another important tip with Orisa's shield is to place it in such a way that provides maximum cover to your team, providing minimum angles for the enemy team to damage the barrier. In this example, you can see the barrier in the choke is protecting the entire choke, but the enemy team is able to shoot the barrier from a lot of different angles. Now we move the barrier back to the corner there. The barrier is still providing a lot of cover for my team, but a lot fewer angles for the enemy team to attack it. They can basically only hit it when we can hit them. Now let's talk about Orisa's ultimate, Supercharger. Here are the numbers on screen regarding the glowing bongo. Some general Supercharger tips is to make sure you have a shield to combine with your Supercharger so it has some protection, and also there's really no perfect time to use it. There are a couple uses which we are going to go over, but there is never a perfect time where you're like, hey, I need to use Supercharger right now. You just have to trust your own judgment and do your best. There are a few standard uses of Supercharger that I am going to go over. The first use is to win a fight with overwhelming damage by having Supercharger on 6 allies. A 50% team-wide damage boost is insane, and if used correctly can win a fight by itself. The second use of Supercharger is to deter the enemy team from fighting you. When you are defending and you do not want the enemy team to attack you, you can Supercharger early to deter them from pushing in. If you're waiting for someone to respawn or maybe waiting for a key ability, it's a good use of Supercharger to buy your team some time. The enemy team can either retreat and wait out your Supercharger, or they can push in while your team has a 50% damage advantage. Another use of Supercharger is to break enemy shields. This can really open up the fight for your team to push in while the enemy shield is broken. So let's look at 2 in-game examples. The first clip is going to showcase Orisa attacking Reinhardt's shield without the Supercharger. Reinhardt will have 350 HP left on his shield. With the damage boost from the Supercharger, Orisa is able to destroy Reinhardt's shield by herself with ammo remaining. Finally, you can also use Supercharger to wombo combo with an ally. Your team isn't running an Ana, but you have a Genji, you can use Supercharger to boost his Dragon Blade by 50%. In this example, you can see that without the Supercharger, Genji is not able to kill Roadhog, but once you combo Dragon Blade with Supercharger, he is able to kill Roadhog even though Roadhog uses Take a Breather. Now let's talk about some general Supercharger tips and tricks. Where you place Supercharger is very important. You want to place it in such a way that it can affect and boost your team without being easily destroyed by the enemy. Placing it around corners or behind terrain is your best bet. In order to receive the 50% damage boost, you need 50% of the Supercharger to be visible to your character model. Knowing this, you can use natural slopes in the terrain like stairs to hide the Supercharger very well while it still affects your team. Another tip is, you can also place the Supercharger near pits, so when enemies try to rotate to kill it, you can halt them into an environmental kill. Also, Supercharger is an ultimate that you can lose if you get killed or stunned while you're dropping it in the animation, so be careful. If you are very afraid of losing it, you can always Fortify first, that way you take reduced damage and no one can stun you. And finally, the Supercharger can be run over by the payload, so do not place the Supercharger in the direction the payload is moving. You will instantly lose your ultimate if the payload even touches it. I have definitely lost Superchargers in the past because I got run over by the payload. Now let's talk about Orisa's alternate fire, Halt. Here are the numbers surrounding Halt. Orisa's Halt is a very unique ability. It's one of a handful of non-ultimate abilities that is able to displace multiple enemies from a distance. The other two abilities are Junkrat's Mine and Pharah's Concussion Blast. Orisa's Halt is a pretty slow projectile that travels in a straight line. The radius of effect is 7.5 meters as you saw in that picture, and it needs line of sight. The Halt projectile passes through enemy shields and bodies, and after you halt someone, they are briefly slowed. Halt is Orisa's best ability. Good Orisa play comes from good Halt usage. If good Orisa play was broken down into percentages, 60% of it would be Halt, 30% of it would be shields, and the last 10% is Supercharger, Primary Fire, Fortify, etc. Halt is so important to being a good Orisa. The way you want to use Halt is to create opportunities that would not have existed otherwise. The main opportunities you are looking for as Orisa are ways to deal damage and secure kills, or to save allies. An offensive example of Halt is to pull an enemy off the high ground to secure a kill, and a defensive example of Halt is to pull a Genji away from your healers as he dashes in. Now I'm going to show you a lot of in-game examples on how to use Halt and how Halt works, so let's get into it. A lot of these are going to be very rapid fire as they don't take a lot of explaining, so just get ready for a bunch of quick tips. If Halt is activated while the tether is on an enemy, there is no breaking it, not even Wraith form. You can combo this with a Roadhog to deny the enemy escape.
So the retake's gonna be hard with this comp. Get the Winston, get the Winston. Oh, nice.
The Halt projectile passes through enemies. Halt also passes through shields. Halt can be reflected, and you cannot activate it as Orisa. It will just keep going till it hits an object, and it will affect your team. Halt can be absorbed. Halt does not pull through shields. Halt slows enemies pulled for a short time, however if you pull them into the air, the slow will fade by the time they land on the ground. Now let's talk about some rapid fire examples on how to use Halt, one of the most common being pulling people off the high ground. Roadhog's pull down behind us, guys.
Hook flash down.
Yo, McCree's down. Shoot Halt parallel to the high ground to increase your chances of pulling someone down. Because the Halt projectile will never travel over the ledge you want to pull someone down from, you have more time to make the pull.
I almost have trans again.
Junkrat's down. One of the most powerful ways to use Halt is to get environmental kills. Use Halt to pull enemies out of cover. You can combo this with allied snipers or Roadhogs in order to do a lot of damage and get easy kills. I I call this one the pulled pork combo. You can combo Halt with allied ultimates. Use Halt to pull enemies that are fleeing back into the fight. Use Halt to pull enemies to the other side of your shield so you can win the duel. Halt enemies into the air for free damage. Halt the ground to get easy headshots on enemies. The enemy's head hitbox doesn't move nearly as much when you pull someone horizontally versus vertically. This is my preferred damage dealing method of Halt. I prefer this over halting people into the air. Use Halt to ground enemies like D.Va, Genji, and Doomfist for easy kills. Use Halt to displace enemies during their ultimates. You can use Halt to move a charging Reinhardt. Use Halt to move a sentry Bastion. You can use Halt to pressure enemy shields. In this example, without Halt, Reinhardt makes it all the way, but if I halt him back, my Bastion's able to break his shield. When fighting enemies behind the shield, you can use Halt to pull them out from behind the shield either horizontally or vertically. When facing an enemy Reinhardt, if you want to pull a specific target behind Reinhardt out from the shield, you can shoot your Halt in such a way it targets just them and doesn't pull the Reinhardt.
Chase, 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 chase.
That's how you pull someone out from behind a Reinhardt shield, baby. A defensive way to use Halt is to create space. Examples include alting Genjis away from allies, or halting Winstons or D.Vas that dive away from your teammates. Alright guys, that covers a lot of rapid fire ways to use Halt. Now if you noticed, I didn't cover one of the more common ways to use Halt, which I like to call the group hug. The group hug is when Orisa players shoot out their Halt and pull the entire enemy team together. I really do not like this use of Halt, as there are so many other ways to use Halt which I just demonstrated. I feel like this offers no value, it doesn't really bring anything to the team, and is a waste of the Halt cooldown. This is what the group hug looks like on your screen right now. I don't recommend it. There's way better ways to use Halt that I would rather see players use. Now let's talk about positioning with Orisa. As Orisa, you want to position in such a way where you are maintaining a safe zone around you with your shield and abilities, while creating distance between you and the enemy that you can punish with your primary fire and your alternate fire. Any way that they try to attack you, they will be exposed to you and your teammates' fire. That is the goal with Orisa's positioning. Now I want to be clear, Orisa is a character that is supposed to be on the front line, and you maintain that front line presence with her shield and Fortify, etc. And as long as you have some good healers and awareness, you should be able to hold that front line pretty easily. Now let's look at some in-game examples of what I'm talking about. These positions on a couple maps are going to showcase what I mean when I say create a safe zone for your team while keeping your distance from the enemy. Orisa is a character that wants to be at range from her enemies and not up close. In this first position on Hanamura, with this shield on defense, your team can use that natural terrain on the left while attacking enemies as they come in through that door or through the top right. This next position on Eichenwald kind of has the same elements as that position on Hanamura. As the enemy team is pushing in, there's a lot of long sightlines for Orisa and her team to punish. If the enemy team ends up making it through the choke, Orisa can easily rotate to the point. Here is another position on Lijiang Tower Night Market. This position has a lot of long sightlines as well as covers most of the entrances the attackers will use. In conjunction with Orisa's abilities and a support from her team, you'll make a nightmare for the enemy team pushing into you. This last position on Dorado has a lot of those same elements as the other three positions, but I want to talk briefly about attacking as Orisa versus defending. When you're attacking with Orisa, your positioning is going to be a little different. It's going to be much more slow and steady wins the race kind of style. You want to take space with your shields, making sure to use natural terrain to provide more coverage for your team, and at some point you might have to get in the enemy's face, which on defense you want to avoid as much as possible. The one weird thing about positioning with Orisa is when you have to use Supercharger. Supercharger is not something you want to be on the front line, however sometimes that is the case. If you have the time and the luxury, communicate to your team that you are going to fall back and place Supercharger. If you can't do that, as I said in the Supercharger section, try to place it around corners and combine it with a shield so it has as much uptime as possible. Now let's talk about target selection as Orisa. Because of the way Orisa's primary fire works, the fact that it's projectile and that it can headshot and that she has a large magazine, I find it's best to target enemy tanks with Orisa first. If you consistently focus the enemy tanks and land those headshots, you will be doing tons of damage and you will have a lot more superchargers if you focus on the tanks instead of trying to focus on small nimbile squishies who are hard to hit because Orisa's weapon is projectile. On screen, you're going to see two examples, one fighting a Roadhog and one fighting a Pharah. As you can see, fighting the Roadhog is a lot easier than fighting the Pharah. He's just a huge target and he's really easy to headshot. Versus when I'm fighting the Pharah, she's flying around at a distance, and since Orisa is projectile, it is that much harder to hit her. And this is just Pharah. Imagine fighting like a Tracer or a Genji. It is not easy. Now, I want to be clear that if a better target than a tank presents himself to you as Orisa, go ahead and attack them instead. If you are fighting a D.Va and that's getting healed by Mercy and the D.Va starts to retreat and fly away, of course, turn on the Mercy, kill her, use Halt to stop the Mercy from flying away. This D.Va sacrificed her position on the front line, enabling you to then focus the Mercy and get a key kill for your team. So, attacking the tanks isn't the end-all be-all of Orisa target selection, but that's kind of your go-to, and if you know or you see an opportunity to attack an enemy squishy out of position, maybe use Halt to pull them out of position, then go for it 100%. Now let's move on to the final topic, Orisa's gameplay loop. In my experience, Orisa has a very clear gameplay loop. All her abilities flow together in an order that makes sense and maximizes her potential in the battlefield. Her gameplay loop is shield, shoot, halt, fortify. That's the loop. You shield, shoot, halt, fortify, and repeat. First, you place down a shield to defend your space or create space for your team. Then, using her fusion driver, you shoot at the enemies to try and pressure them and get some kills. If you can't do that, that's where Halt comes into play. You use Halt in conjunction with your fusion driver to secure kills for your team. If the enemies start to push into your space through your shield, that's when you use Fortify. So that is Orisa's standard gameplay loop. Obviously, throughout the course of a match, you will get Superchargers, and we talked about those in the Supercharger section, but for the most part, Orisa's gameplay loop is shield, shoot, halt, fortify, repeat. Alright guys, that concludes the Orisa guide. It covers about 95% of what I think you need to know to be a good Orisa player. The last 5% is just really situational map stuff, hero stuff, etc. But for general Orisa gameplay and how to be good with Orisa on a game-to-game basis, I think I have covered that in depth in this guide. I know this is a long guide. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you learned something, please consider giving it a like and sharing it with your friends. If you want to see more of this type of content, think about subscribing on YouTube, and you can also check out my streams and know when those are happening on Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. All my links will be in the description, guys. Thank you so much to everyone that helped me with the in-game examples. I couldn't have done it without you. So again, one last time, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found it helpful, and as always, have a good one. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. Check out these two other videos on the left hand side, and be sure to subscribe by clicking that button on the right. If you like all of this stuff, you can follow me on Twitch, Twitter, Discord, and of course YouTube. All the links will be in the description below. Again, thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good one.